Hello there. Yeah. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are working on the 07K 5-cylinder engine, the 2.5 liter from Volkswagen. I've got Integrated Engineering's billet fuel rail here. So yeah, we're going to be installing that. This thing is massive.
That's what she said.
Gonna flow a ton of fuel. Performance wise, it's gonna be the same on an NA car, but this would prep you pretty heavily for a pretty serious boosted build if you're going turbo on these. Something to spruce up the engine bay on mine. Got it on a really good deal on Black Friday. Yeah, I know it's well past Black Friday. Get off my back, I've been busy. Anyways, this is going to be a how-to install this billet fuel rail, as well as a how-to on replacing your fuel injectors, replacing your fuel injector seals. So if you're just working on your 2.5 liter and you're not upgrading any of the parts, but you just need to replace some, yeah, fuel injector wise, seal wise, this is going to be the video for you. Yeah, just watch the video. It's going to be very informative. So obviously we've got the fuel rail here. This is the new billet one from Integrated Engineering. This is the crappy looking factory piece. Integrated Engineering does send it with these standoffs here, so these are gonna be what holds it onto the intake manifold. Obviously I've already got the stage 2 set up with Integrated Engineering's short runner intake manifold, so this assembly is going to be more in lines on that. It might vary slightly if you are working with the factory manifold. However, in theory, everything else is pretty much going to be the same. Some things you do need to pick up. These are some -8 AN fittings. They are the orb fittings, so they are O-ring seals. You need a plug for one end and then a barb. I believe this goes to a 3/8 barb to a -8 AN. That's going to line up with the factory fuel line there. I will leave links to everything I use in this video down in the description below, so if you have any questions or you still need some parts or anything, definitely check those links out. Everything is going to be down there. If you are doing some type of custom setup, you may use something different on that end, as well as maybe going to some AN line there if you're running a full custom line. However, this is just going on a standard Mark V 2.5 liter that is stage tuned. Get it? Tuned. Stage 2 tuned. Ha ha ha. All right, that's enough dad jokes for the day. I also am going to be replacing my injector seals. So I got this kit from FCP Euro. Again, links will be down in the description, but these have all the O-ring seals that we need, as well as the clips. And then I would highly recommend, sorry, I'm not prepared, I'm missing parts. I would highly recommend using some O-ring grease on these. It'll prolong the O-rings. You don't want to be messing with O-rings, sliding them in dry and whatnot. You're more likely to crack them and break them and then have to do the job all over. So we don't want any leaks when we're done. We want to do it right. And then just some basic hand tools. This is going to be a fairly simple process. So the first step is going to be to find your fuel pump fuse, and then you're going to want to pull that one out. In my particular vehicle, it happens to be this number 15 amp, just this 15 amp blue fuse here. So we are going to pull that guy out just like that, and then with that pulled out, you can actually crank the ignition over on the vehicle, and that will alleviate the pressure. The vehicle probably will not start. If it does, I would be surprised because there's no pressure behind it to feed the fuel injectors. Like I said, won't start because the fuel pump is not pressurizing the system. That is going to alleviate the pressure there. If you want to alleviate the pressure on the back side of the pump, this is going to be more important when you're actually dealing with like the fuel filter and stuff. Just take your cap off. Boom. Pressure done. Just kidding. Last step in bleeding it here is, you can see there's a Schrader valve on the factory fuel rail here. You're going to have to pull that cap off and then relieve some of the pressure just using a small flat blade screwdriver. I am going to put some rags down here underneath it to capture anything that comes out. You will want to wear eye protection.
better.
Because obviously if there still is pressure built up in there, you definitely don't want to get fuel splashed in your eyes. And I should probably also mention that you don't want to be doing this when the engine's hot. You get fuel on any of these hot parts here. This is all metal connected to the cylinder head. Definitely don't want fuel splashing on something that's hot and could potentially ignite it. So be careful when you're doing this. Obviously, safety first. All you got to do is unscrew this cap, and then you can see that's just a standard Schrader valve. You can just relieve some of the pressure there. Some fuel will come out. Put the cap back on. We are ready to start disconnecting stuff. Obviously, we're going to have to disconnect the line here, and we are going to have to undo all these plugs for the electrical connections on the fuel injectors. Get all that disconnected, and then we will be able to take the fuel rail off. You will need some sort of pan or funnel here that's going to go into a pan, some sort of deal to capture, because there's still going to be fuel in here. You did relieve the pressure here, but this is still full of fuel. So fuel is going to come out when you disconnect this line. So we are going to want to try to capture that and not get it all over our serpentine belts and everything down there. So we're just going to go along and unclip all of these connections, anything that's on that wiring harness. Careful with your clips because sometimes they're brittle. Sometimes if you push down, release, and then pull up, it's a little easier to get them off. Two connectors here I'm going to do off camera because they're a little easier with both hands. But you've got obviously 5 fuel injectors, your sensor up here, and then your purge valve. Those are all on the same wiring harness, so it's just going to make life a lot easier working with this fuel rail. If it's completely disconnected, you can actually get the wires and everything out of the way. You can pull this purge valve line off the throttle body. That'll just make working with all this easier to get it out of the way. So I got everything disconnected. I actually unclipped this upper line here that was going to the throttle body just to get it out of the way, and then I ran all the wiring off to the side here. I just had it sitting under the fuel rail here, so I just moved it off to the side to make it easier to work with. And then this is my little setup for capturing any fuel that's going to come out here. Just a little funnel with a hose that's going to go into an old cup. So we are going to go ahead and disconnect this hose clamp here and then try to get this fuel line off, get everything drained, and then we can work on pulling the actual fuel rail off with the injectors intact. So you want to be careful if you're using a flat blade because obviously you don't want to cut the line. So we're just going to work around it slowly. I can twist it a little bit with the pliers, but again, being very careful. You don't want to break the hose or the fitting. You see it's starting to back off now a little bit. Not too much fuel. There's probably still going to be some fuel in the rail because this is obviously not sloped down, which you can kind of just put a towel around, put it off to the side, then you don't have to worry about that. And then we can start getting the fuel rail off. So this is the part where it's going to vary slightly and be a little different if you're on the factory intake manifold versus the integrated engineering one here. In my case, I've got 2 Allen head screws holding it in. They are a 5 mil, so we're going to remove those screws, and then we should be able to slowly rock the fuel rail out with the injectors intact, and then we can move it over to the workbench and work on swapping the injectors over to the new rail and getting the new fuel rail prepped, all the O-rings and everything prepped. Just keep in mind when you do pull this out, you are going to have open ports here going directly into your intake valves, so you definitely want to, keep any dirt and debris away from falling in there, as well as don't drop any tools or anything in there. When we take it out, I'm going to try to slowly rock it up and then dump the fuel rail into the funnel there. Should just fill the cup up, and then we can dispose of the fuel properly. Don't really have to worry about the fuel rail when you get this last bolt out. It's not just going to fall over on you. Obviously the injectors are pushed into the runners and they've got those O-ring seals on there. So you can see it'll rock a little bit, but it's not just going to fall over on you, so you don't got to worry about that. This is the part where you just want to be careful. Don't just go hulking out all at once. You don't want to break your injectors. Slowly rock it around a little bit. Make sure you're getting all the injectors because you want the whole thing to come up all at once. And then you can dump whatever fuel is left. And there you are. Whole rail, 5 injectors, all pulled away from the vehicle all at once. All right, we've got all our stuff lined up over here. So I'm just gonna go kind of in order. Start at one side, get them all lined up. I'm gonna take all the injectors off, keep them in the same order. That way they go back in the same order. So these clips are gonna have to come off. They are just pushed on clips, so you can kind of spread them from one side and then just push backwards to release. So you'll see the open end of the clip. On this side, you just kind of spread these tongs. They're just pressure fit on there. So you can just slide them off. The integrated engineering fuel rail is designed to use the same factory clips. So factory hardware, factory injectors, everything should go on without an issue. So now you might get a little bit more fuel coming out of these, but these injectors are just gonna come straight up. There is an O-ring in there, so if you twist it a little bit and then try to come straight out with it, obviously we don't want to damage the injectors, but just go slowly, take your time, and all 5 are off. So obviously, just like I said, take your time with those. Last thing you want to do is break an injector. But we've got all of our injectors lined up here. Obviously you can see there is an O-ring that seals it to the fuel rail and an O-ring that seals it to the intake manifold down in the injection ports. So both of those will have to come off, and we can just swap those for the new ones. When you're putting the new ones on, definitely use some O-ring grease. You don't have to go super heavy on it, but it'll be kind of like an assembly lube as well as a protectant. Just keep in mind that you don't want to gunk up the tip of your injectors there. Alright, so we got the fuel injectors here, just various couple of picks. Obviously you want to be careful when using a pick, but we can just go through, work all these O-rings off. Now depending on what your O-rings look like, if you're just swapping to the new fuel rail, you could probably get away with this. I would recommend replacing them anytime you have the injectors out, but I have had these out before. These are actually the original seals, so when I did the short runner intake manifold, I did not replace them, and I know that I should have, because a couple of them were definitely starting to show signs of age, like this one here. So I don't know how well that's going to pick up on camera, but you can definitely see it did seal, but it's definitely aged out to the point where we want to replace it. All the old seals off, you can go around, especially on the tip side. You can see how dirty that is. You can clean it up the best you can with just a paper towel. There's all the old O-rings, so now we can go through and start putting the new O-rings on. Keep in mind you are going to want to use some O-ring grease. Again, not much. Just have a paper towel handy so you can wipe off any of the extra, and then we will just start working them all back on. Again, when you're going on, be very careful if you are using a pick of any kind that you're not puncturing or creating any problems in the new O-rings. Really just takes enough to give it that wet look. So once you get over it, you don't need it caked on there and like globbed on there. Just enough to give it that little bit of a wet look. You can just put a little bit on there and then just rub it around. You can see how it goes from more of a matte finish to more of a glossy look. That is enough to keep them all moisturized and primed. Dabble do ya. Now we're just going to carefully work them all on. Again, you've got the green down here by the nozzle and the black up here by the inlet port. So just be careful, there's a little ledge there. You don't want to cut the O-ring on that, but you can just kind of work it around so it sits in. Pretty obvious when it's on, so I don't think that'll be a problem. That is what it'll look like when it's done. You've got green down by the tip, and then you've got the black one up by the inlet port. There is all 5 primed and ready to get put in the fuel rail. First things first, we got to prep the integrated engineering fuel rail for installment. So we've got the fuel rail here. You're going to have these 2 mounting plates here. This is where the hardware that the kit comes with, these standoffs, this is where these are going to get bolted into. So if I was prepared, I would already have this bag open. So you got your 2 standoffs, your 2 bolts. They pretty much only go in one way because you can see you've got the curve there that matches up with the curve here. So they're just going to sit in there like that. you've got the recessed spot so the bolt will sit flush. I do recommend some blue thread lock. These don't have to be super tight, so just hand tighten them and then snug them up. And then they are mounted on there. Now we're going to prep the fuel rail by putting those fittings on. We're going to cap the right hand side, put the fitting on the left hand side. That way we can get the fuel line on. So these I picked up from Racetronics. They are out of Canada. I've looked at them already, and I've got some other projects happening on the car that I'm going to be using some of their actual AN fittings. Not that these aren't actual AN fittings, but you know, the traditional AN fittings with AN line. So definitely subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, hit the bell next to the subscribe button. That way you get notified when the new videos come out, because a lot of cool projects happening to the Mark V Jetta. And if you got a guess what those projects are, go ahead and leave your guess down in the comments below. I'm going to prep these with a little bit of Teflon tape. We are going to grease the O-rings with the same grease that we used on the injectors. And then now that the fittings are prepped, we can go ahead and start installing them. Again, making sure you're putting them on the proper sides. Should be able to start them and get them pretty much run all the way down by hand. Once you start hitting pressure on the O-ring, get the wrench out, snug them up. But the O-ring is going to be what is doing the sealing. So with both the fittings and the mounts on there, we are ready to start putting the injectors on. So we can just line them up and go in the same order that we have them laid out here. That way they're in the same ports when we get them on the vehicle. So we can just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm putting these injectors in. You can see the tab here on the one side, it's opposite the electrical connection. That is going to line up on the rail with the same tab. So just line those tabs up. It's going to be a little tight, fresh O-rings and everything, but we did grease them, so they should be somewhat okay. But just like so, push them all down. And again, when they're in there, you can twist them. So when we go to put the clips on, if they're not orientated 100% correctly, it'll be fine. Now these clips, if you remember right, go in from the side with the flange on it. They're orientated like that with those little tabs on the top. There's a groove on the injector that has to line up. That is going to be what it looks like when it's on, though. You can see everything fits in the proper grooves. That's how you know it's fully seated and it'll grab. You can push the injectors down a little too far and not miss that groove in there. So you definitely want it to grab. But you can see it's got the injector on there and everything sits and locks into that groove that is machined onto the fuel rail. There you have it. Fully primed and prepped fuel rail ready to bolt onto the intake manifold. Just make sure all your clips are properly seated on every single one. All right, now we're back in the engine bay. Obviously you want to make sure all these runners are clean and clear. You got your fuel rail here. You're ready to just slide all the injectors in. Again, the same as when you were pulling them out of the car. Just firm pressure straight down on them. You should be able to pop them in. And then your holes for your mounting on your fuel rail should line up. So we'll just use some blue Loctite on these 2 screws here. We will cinch them down, just snug them up, and then we'll be able to put the fuel line on. All right, now everything's ready to just kind of get plumbed back up. You can start bringing your electrical connections over. You can bring your fuel line, slide it on, put your clamp on, make sure everything's tied in the way you want it. The barb on here is slightly a different size than factory, so it might be a little bit more tough putting it on than it was taking it off. But we definitely want to make sure we got it on enough to make a good sealed connection. That old clamp, since this barb's a little bigger, that old clamp's gonna be a little small. So I'm just gonna get one of the ring clamps on there, tighten that down. You can see here a little bit how it bows up a little bit. slightly bigger fitting on here, but that was the best I could find in a Dash 8 adapter. Worst comes to worst, this soft line for the fuel starts right here, goes to here. You could replace the line, but we're just gonna get the rest of this all kind of buttoned back up. We are ready to hook up our fuel pump relay again, i.e. putting the fuse back in, and then we can prime the system and check for leaks. Ideally, you would have that purge valve here so you could let any air out of the system. But since we don't have that on here, you could back that plug out. It should work itself out and be fine. Let her rip, tater chip. Little stutter there, which is expected. Fittings are dry. Fuel injectors all look dry. So you are up and running with either your new fuel rail or your new injectors and seals. We are all done with the system. We pressurized it, we ran it, we checked it, no leaks. But like I said, more projects coming in the future. Some other goodies to make the engine bay look good. So definitely hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell next to it, that way you're getting notified when new videos come out, so you can be the first ones to watch them and the first ones to give them a thumbs up, because that's always just an accomplishment in itself, right? It just makes you feel good. On top of that, got some other I'm just gonna say drivetrain stuff happening, and some suspension stuff happening. So definitely stay tuned for Mark V Volkswagen stuff, as well as you know, 2.5 liter 5-cylinder stuff, 07K, because it's the glorious baby V10, right? Thanks for watching. Hope this video helped you out if you were doing injectors, injector seals, or just the overall parts needed and the process to get the billet fuel rail in from Integrated Engineering. Yeah, see you next time. Obviously, I don't think I needed to tell you to put your fuel cap back on and shut the fuel door. All you got left is to button everything up though, cover up your fuels panel. If you haven't already, put all your tools away. Go take it for a test drive, enjoy it, and then come back in and check for leaks again, just to make sure under load, under a little higher pressure than idle, that you don't have any leaks. So, with that being said, next.